And then when we look at this data point, this is looking at advertising awards that are based on effectiveness and the factors that are contributing to effectiveness. And coming in at number one, which is much bigger than number two and so on, is brand size. And when we think back of all this, the largest brands have the easiest time of creating those memory associations. They're already present in their minds, so they already have these memory structures, and they're present on the grocery store shelves so that we see them throughout when we go about the world.
Now, the question you should be asking is, how do I get there? So let's walk you through some examples of how other companies have gotten there and see what we can learn from them. So we go through 3 phases of startup business with our friends at Apple.
We previously talked about these different phases a little bit from the company perspective, but really this is about the mind of the customer that dictates which phase you're in. Because when you build that strong brand, then you have that instant affinity, and that's the thing that creates you into that next phase. So when you're at the startup phase, it's just blank. They don't really have a notion of who you are and an image of who you are. As you begin to grow, it's a little bit blurry, but it's starting to come in, that brand. And then when you've reached that mature phase, then you've got that solid definition of what the brand is in your mind.
And so as we think about phase of business, it's much more important to think about phase of business from the perspective of your consumers. What do they think about me? As opposed to any operational logistical place that you might be and saying, oh, we've got factories in 12 locations around the country. That's not nearly as important as what your consumers think you are. Now, how our friends at Apple got there. And I love some of the images you found here, including the very first Apple computer.
Yeah, this was a shocker to me. I kind of had to get multiple sources to confirm, but you can imagine that whoever was using this early Apple computer, it was a very small group of people, and they were very tied to what that actual product was. And when we look at how they advertise, it's also going to be, as Jake talked about, that kind of startup mentality approach to advertising. Here's a little article about them.
Hey, we sell computers. That has to be the message you get across in that early phase. Just let people know you exist, and it's very sales driven. All of Apple's early sales involved Jobs and Wozniak and the crew going out and knocking on doors and saying, hey, buy some computers from me. But as they progressed, the structure changed. They began to get a little awareness, and they went into a growth phase. And during that growth phase, sure, it continued to be a little sales driven or very sales driven, but they realized to accelerate, they had to begin building a brand. And they began doing some things that at the time people thought were fairly controversial.
Yeah, the real turning point for Apple was in 1984 when they transitioned into that strong brand building and the mentality of the idea of the individual, the person. They transcended the product into something that was bigger. And here's a short clip of that.
Today we celebrate the first glorious anniversary of the information purification directives. We have created for the first time in all history a garden of pure ideology where each worker may bloom, secure from the pests, obeying contradictory thoughts. Our unification of thoughts is more powerful a weapon than any fleet or army on earth. We are one people, with one will, one resolve, one cause. Our enemies shall talk themselves to death, and we will bury them with their own confusion. We shall prevail.
On January 24th, Apple Computer will introduce Macintosh. And you'll see why 1984 won't be like 1984.
It's easy to forget, back in 1984, Apple was tiny. IBM, who was the major computer manufacturer at the time, didn't even have them on their competition set. If you knew about Apple, it was kind of a surprise to most people. And the second tier companies in that space, like Microsoft, who made all the operating system, dominated. Apple was inconsequential, but they knew the value of branding.
This video is from our webinar series, and you can check out intermarkgroup.com/webinar to watch the full series. We're a full-service advertising agency that embeds a layer of behavioral science in our creative. And you can check out the information below to learn more about us and to contact us to help you solve your marketing challenges.